Okay, so good morning, everyone. Again, I apologize for being a little bit late this morning. I had difficulty clearing the window in the car and couldn't see, and therefore had to wait until the car heated up and the window cleared. So it was an extra 10 or 12 minutes, and so here I am, a little bit on the late side. So I apologize for that. Jesse is here, so good morning, Jesse, and Crazio is here. Good morning, Crazio. Let's jump in. So yesterday, oh yes, yesterday we were talking about these romantic comedies, right? These romantic comedy movies. And again, not every romantic comedy fits this kind of pattern, but lots of them do, right? And we I took you through, how some of these kind of movies work, but generally what we see is, this wonderful woman, she's got a great life, but something's missing, right? And sometimes it's her friends, or sometimes it's her parents, or somebody's trying to convince her that something's missing, right? And what's missing is the guy, right? Love. And so often, she kind of meets her and they kind of meet cute, but then he has to kind of convince her, he has to win her over. And finally he usually does, and they live happily ever after. But again, these kind of movies reinforce certain ideas, right? The idea that, women are somehow incomplete without a man, right? And again, it's not to say that there's anything wrong with looking for a boyfriend or a husband, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Lots of people do it. Lots of people want to do it. It's great, right? But what's interesting is that are there similar movies for men, right? Are there movies for men where, the man has this great life and, everything's going well for him, and his friends are like, dude, something's missing, isn't it? Don't you want to find that one true love, right? You don't kind of see those movies for guys, right? There's the messages for guys are different, right? And so here women are kind of getting the message that, their lives are incomplete without a man. But what messages are men getting in guy movies usually? Well, I don't know, what are guy movies?
Action movies.
Do they get the same?
Yeah.
You think so? Yeah. Um, if we said, yeah, if we said action movies were guy movies, what kind of messages do guys get in those movies?
They're strong, they're superheroes, save you.
Yeah. Interestingly, some of the same messages that the toys for little boys were transmitting as well, right?
Yeah.
Strength and, going out there and having adventure and protecting others, right? Those things are all still in there. I'm just going to pull this down here. What are maybe some of the messages about women that we find in action movies? Oh, that's the wrong one.
You have to prove that with that.
Yeah. What are some of the messages we get about women in action movies? Or is
Strong
it-
women, superheroes like Black Widow.
Okay, so sometimes we have some strong female characters mixed in, right? Like Black Widow, for sure. You know what? Let's not deal with that because it's going to get us too off track, and let's focus on what's in front of us here. So, um, yeah, so we kind of have these ideas kind of transmitted, through the movies. And again, there's nothing wrong with getting married or any of that stuff, but the message here is that this is what makes women's lives complete, right? And again, I think it's interesting in these stories that her perspective is often wrong, right? She starts out the movie thinking her life is great, right? And I think we've seen some of these movies, and in many cases they are, right? Like these women have good friends around them, and their parents sometimes, and they have dogs, and they have a good job, and things are going really well in many cases, and yet it's not quite good enough, right? And so, but she thinks it is, but everyone else is like, oh no, you have to find that guy. And by the end of the movie, it turns out that pretty much everyone else is right except her, even though it's her movie, right? And I think that's kind of weird, right? To privilege kind of the viewpoint of everyone else except the woman, right? That's kind of strange. The other thing I'll point out to you here, this is a bit of a gear change here, but have you ever heard of this? No? It comes from, as you can see here, it comes from a comic strip in the 1980s about lesbians. So these two lesbian characters in the comic strip, they're going to a movie, and they're trying to decide which movie to see. And one of the characters says, you know, I only go to a movie if it satisfies these 3 rules. And so it was kind of a, you know, it was a joke at the time, but it actually became something more. And so the rule here is that the movie has to have at least 2 women characters in it. They have to talk to each other, and they have to talk about something other than the guy, or other than just men in general. They have to talk about something else. Now, without really checking, how many movies do you think pass this test? They pass all 3. Nobody wants to talk to me? Did I offend you somehow?
I'm not too sure.
Huh?
I'm not
Take a guess. I know you don't know.
Because
So-
I don't watch a lot of movies to begin with.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, how many movies what percentage of movies do you think pass the test? What percentage of movies have 2 female characters that talk to each other and talk to each other about something other than the man or the guy?
30?
What's that?
30.
Only 30%?
I think 10.
Only 10%? Wow. Nadi, what do you think? What's that? 40 or 50? Edel, what do you think? 30? Give or take? Dunya? 50, 60? 60. Okay. Interesting. We have a wide range of estimates there. Although interestingly kind of trending on the low side, right? Because this seems like Crazio says, or Kayla says 15. Wow, this is interesting. Kayla says 15. Crazio says 20. Yeah, that's so interesting. Why are you guessing so low?
Because I'm guessing it on basis of the movies that I have watched, and so far I have watched so many movies, and girls are definitely girls that I've watched it in very less movies.
Yeah.
So based on my thoughts and the movies I've watched, I'm giving this percentage.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, you know, the thing is that you're not too far off, right? It's let me just see here. Oh, I seem to be missing a slide or two. I'm missing several slides. Interesting. But what you'll find is that, geez, where did my slides go? What you will, I think what happens is sometimes, you know, if I don't get through everything in a class, I take those slides and move them over to the next day, but sometimes they get rearranged and deleted in the process, and so I think I'm missing a few slides. But yeah, what you'll find is it's definitely less than 50%, right? And in many cases, you'll find that definitely more than half of the movies out there do not satisfy this simple rule, right? Which is kind of shocking, is it not? Because girls, maybe you can help me out here because there's several women in the class today. Do you talk, when you get together with your girlfriends, do you talk about things other than guys?
Yes.
Really? You have other things to talk about?
Most of it.
It's not just about us all the time?
No.
Oh.
We talk about other things.
Oh, that kind of hurts my feelings. I thought you were just talking about us guys all the time.
Boring.
What's that?
It can get boring.
How can it get boring to talk about guys? We're so awesome.
Nah. No.
No. Well, I'm being very sarcastic and silly here. But of course, right? Of course, women have other things to talk about than just guys, right? But the movies would not have you believe that, right? The movies seem to suggest that all women talk about are men, right? And lots of the movies actually only pass this test because women are talking about kind of marriage and babies. So they're not talking about men specifically, but they're talking about that in general, right? Yeah, shoot, I'm gonna have to find my slides. But it's shocking about how many movies do not pass this simple test, right? And what's kind of yeah, like what's kind of the message that that women kind of receive from movies? I wonder. Like, how does it feel to have female characters who never talk about anything except guys?
We have to find the one. Like it I guess movies like that might push someone to find the ideal like guy and
Yeah, right? Like it kind of it sends you the message that, hey ladies, whatever you're talking about with your girlfriends, this is what you should be talking about, right? This is what you should be focused on, right? Not solving climate change or, repainting your apartment or should you get a dog, but this is the clear problem here, finding a man, right? And again, for some women it is, and that's fantastic. There's nothing wrong. But movies are really kind of flattening female characters, right? It's almost like the stock character, right? The stock character, there's not much to, right? There's not a lot of depth to the character. The angry black woman that we talked about, right? She's angry, she's black, she's there to sort of be sassy and, deliver a few funny lines. But we don't really know anything else about her in the movie, right? That's all there is to her. And here, they're almost doing the same thing to women, right? They're just making them, they're flattening them. They're saying, yeah, this is all women are, right? They just talk about men and marriage and babies all the time. And again, there's nothing wrong with those topics, but women have other things to discuss with each other as well, right? Apparently, this is news to me, but I'm teasing. Now, and this is one of the things to kind of pay attention to, is that this is what media does, and it's, for the most part, it's not doing it on purpose, but it normalizes things, right? It makes things seem normal because you see them over and over and over again, right? That's the idea of the stock character. You see them over and over and over and over again, so that when you see them, you know very quickly who they are, right? We kind of know, we know who the absent-minded professor is. We know who the jock is. We know who the damsel in distress is. Oh, save me, hero, right? We kind of know those characters, right? And so we see them so often that they become normal, right? We see plots, like in romantic comedies, so often that they seem normal. We see women in movies who are constantly talking about marriage and babies and men, right? And so that becomes normal as well, right? And we see these things and we kind of subconsciously begin to think that that's the way things are. But of course, they're not, right? This is a fictional world. And again, the fictional world is changing. It's becoming better in this regard. But in the past, it hasn't been great. Sorry? Oh, yeah. So they perpetuate sexism and androcentrism. Andro, I believe, is the Latin, maybe the Greek, for, I always get mixed up. Andro is man, and centric is centered, right? So male-centered, man-centered. Yeah. So there's even in even in many movies that are about women, the male perspective is very strongly there, right? Even in romantic comedies, I would say, has anyone seen Serendipity? No? Okay, we won't talk about it. Um, yeah, so these things become normalized because we see them so often. And when we see them so often, we kind of forget to critique them, right? We don't kind of notice the flaws, right? We don't notice anything wrong because we've seen it so many times, right? And so this brings me to the the feature or concept of misogyny. Okay, so misogyny is kind of a dislike or a contempt for or a prejudice against women, and this is certainly out there. I think you'll definitely find it. One of the places you'll find it is in kind of the toxic masculinity kind of camp, right? You'll also find it in places like uh, well, let me leave that for a second. This is a contempt for women, and this kind of exists, and we can see it in a number of different ways. Sometimes we see it in terms of social exclusion or discrimination. Sometimes we see hostile comments, right, or male-centered comments, or sort of unacknowledged male privilege, right? Sometimes we see women are kind of belittled, right, or people try to take away power from them. Violence against women counts as a form of misogyny as well, as does sexual objectification, right? All of these things kind of spring from an anger or a dislike or a mistrust of women in general.
I don't understand the term social exclusion.
Social exclusion is kind of like, well, socially excluding people, right? You've heard of, I don't know if you've heard, some workplaces are referred to as old boys clubs or just boys clubs in general, right? So the men kind of stick together and use their power, and they kind of exclude women from that circle of power, right? Yeah. So we can find misogyny in a lot of different places. And again, online is a great way to find the worst of humanity. And so you can definitely find some misogyny out there. Again, you'll find a lot of misogyny mixed in with ideas of toxic masculinity, right? The really sort of tough, macho kind of masculinity will often have an undercurrent of
It's also found in separate types of religion.
yeah, religion is, unfortunately, misogyny is not new, and so in some religious texts you can find evidence of, you know, a prejudice towards, a strong prejudice towards women. But where we'll look for it today is here.
Oh,
Anyone seen this show?
I've heard of it.
You've heard of it? Anyone, you've seen it? Seen it or heard of it? Heard of it? Edel, have you seen this show or heard of it? I can't see or hear you back there. Have you seen it? No? Okay. Well, we'll see a little bit of it today, because what I have to show you is a video essay on some of the misogyny that we see in The Big Bang Theory. And this is interesting because, again, I don't think anyone's seen the show, or maybe you've seen it, you've heard of it. Very popular show. I think it was on for 10 years, 10 seasons, 9 or 10 seasons, something like that. Very, very popular, high ratings. Everyone has seen this show. There'll be, it'll be on Netflix and streaming services, and it'll be rerun on television until we're all dead. It's very popular, and it will continue to be popular probably for years, okay? And it centers around, it mostly centers around these four guys that you see here. And so from left to right, there's Howard, and then there's Leonard, and then there's Sheldon, and then on the far right, there's Raj. And all of these guys are kind of nerdy guys. They all kind of work at a university, and I think they're all physicists, except for Howard on the left. Howard's an engineer. But they're all kind of like nerdy physics engineering kind of guys. They're big into, comic books and sort of comic movies and things like that. Basically anything nerdy these guys are kind of into. They're very stereotypical nerds in some way. But in the process of this show, there's actually a lot of misogyny that's kind of floating under the surface, and it gets a lot of laughs in the show. But it's interesting how we don't notice it, and it's interesting how the writers kind of manage to get away with this misogyny. Because you would think if there was a show with a lot of misogyny, people would be angry and not watch it, right? One would think, but that's not really what happens with The Big Bang Theory. In fact, The Big Bang Theory was incredibly popular. Yeah, hugely popular. So what I'd like to do is, again, we'll watch this video, and in it we want to keep track of the social messages that are transmitted about women and men, okay? So what do we hear about what women are like and what men are like? What do we hear about what men should do and shouldn't do, about what women should do and shouldn't do, all that kind of stuff, okay? And also pay attention to what's being laughed at and why, okay? Where are the laughs coming from? What is actually funny, okay? The third thing, I'm going to add a question in here because I want to put it in. How do the writers manage to get away with this? Okay? Because again, you would think if a show had a lot of misogyny, it would upset people and no one would watch it, right? But somehow these writers are managing to not only not make people angry, but they're making people laugh and people are continuing to watch. So what's going on? How do they manage to get away with this? Okay? Yes, but there's more to it. There's more to it. Yeah. So let's watch the video. Online people, the video's in Microsoft Teams, as are the questions. And I'm just going to add in my third question to Microsoft Teams there. I'm going to say, how do the writers, how do the writers get away with so much misogyny? Okay? All right, so we'll watch and then we'll come back and talk about this. Everybody ready to go?
Yep.
All right, let's do this. So, online people, link and questions in Microsoft Teams, and we'll see you very shortly. Okay, do you want to talk about that, or do you want to have a quick break? Good?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what kind of social messages are we hearing about men and women according to the Big Bang Theory?
Women are criticized, and women are in like the less dominant, like dominant group is the men.
Okay, we definitely see that men are kind of the dominant group here. Men are kind of center stage and have the
Women are sexually harassed.
right. We see a lot of kind of sexual harassment of women. We saw that. What else do we what other messages do we hear?
It's fine jokes about women, and when the misogynists are getting hurt, like when their feelings are hurt, if the audience are feeling bad for them, even after they're making jokes.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's start with just the men. So one of the things we see is that that sometimes their feelings get hurt, right? Particularly when their sexist behavior is called out or criticized, and then the audience is supposed to kind of feel bad for them, right? And we saw Howard kind of moping in his bed, right, because he was all sad. What other messages do we hear about what men are like or not like?
I think
What?
sexist.
Definitely, yeah. There's a lot of sexism going on. What else do we hear? There's kind of this whole thing kind of revolves around almost kind of two versions of masculinity, or two versions of kind of a stereotypical man. And what are those two kind of stereotypes?
Being dominant,
Right?
woman,
Yep. So there's the dominant guy, right? The aggressive guy, the macho guy, the tough guy, right? The athletic, jockey, confident, cool, assertive, super masculine guy, right? And then there's and then there's those guys, right? And what are they like?
nerds, but they're sexist.
Yeah, they're sexist, but they're nerdy, right? They're not athletic. They're not confident. What's that?
I find them a bit weird.
You find them a bit weird. They are a bit weird. They're supposed to be a bit weird, right? They're a bit weird. They're a bit nerdy. They're not really confident around women, right? They're awkward. They're kind of not very traditionally masculine in a lot of ways, right? So there's kind of two versions of masculinity that we're working with here. The kind of typical, assertive, aggressive man, and then these kind of like softer, nerdier, more awkward. Yeah. What else are we hearing about women? What are we hearing about women in this video?
Women are objectified.
Yeah, what does it mean to objectify someone or something?
Like they're seen as an object of having fun, or being represented by company.
Yeah, you kind of, when you objectify someone or something, you make them an object, right? You make them a thing, right? So you're not really treating them as a full human. You're treating them as a means to an end.
Like making use of.
You're making use of them. Yeah. So again, you can sexually objectify someone, right? You can think about them or use them as a sexual thing, but you can also objectify people in other ways too. Yeah. So how does the humor work here? What's the audience often laughing at?
It's a joke, and the word that we talk about is lampshading.
Right. So the big one is lampshading, and what's that?
Lampshading
maybe
I'm not sure about that.
maybe not quite. Let's hear from some other people. What is this lamp shading thing? They showed us a very old movie, Charlie Chaplin, from like the 1920s, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
That is very old. But what's lamp shading?
I'm confused.
Yeah. So the joke we saw in the Charlie Chaplin film, that was the kind of the joke, right? Is that Charlie Chaplin is the smaller guy. He's trying to hide from the big guy, and so he takes the lampshade off the lamp and he puts it over his head and he
Oh,
stands.
You pretend to be a lamp.
He stands really still, right? And then the guy comes in and he doesn't see him, right? And of course, but the audience does, right? Like we see and we know, yeah, he's right there. So it's kind of showing something to the audience, right? It's communicating directly with the audience. And in this case, it's communicating and saying, it's okay, we get it, right? So the joke about, Indian monopoly, where the money is in rupees and you build call centers and things like that, and and they point out, Unadi's laughing a little bit, but it's a funny joke, but they point out, they're like, that's racist, right? But so the writers get to point out things, and the writers are almost saying to the audience, it's okay, we know, right? We're not insensitive. We know that's a racist joke, right? But then they don't do anything about it, right? They don't try to critique it. They don't try to change the character's behavior. They're just like, oh, that's racist, and then they move on, right? And so there's lots of this, you can see in. Has anyone seen the second Deadpool movie? Deadpool.
I don't remember.
I haven't seen the sequel.
Oh.
I saw the first one.
Anyone seen Deadpool? No. Deadpool does this all the time because he actually talks to the audience, right? He's a character in the film that talks to the audience. And there's one point where I won't spoil it for you, but something happens in the movie, and he looks at the audience and he's like, well, that's just lazy writing. So he points out that, something that's happened in the movie is just a little too convenient, right? It's a little too easy, but he looks at the audience and he's like, that's just lazy writing, and he sort of shrugs his shoulders, and that's lamp shading as well, right? Because he points out, he's like, yeah, we get it, but we're going to do it anyway, right? And so here with the Big Bang Theory, the lamp shading is pointing out racist or sexist jokes, but then not really doing anything about it, right? So the writers get to say, it's okay, we know, we're not going to do anything about it, but we know, right? And so the audience is like, oh, okay, I almost get permission to laugh at it, right? I almost get permission because the writers are saying, it's okay, we know it's a little, it's a little sensitive, right? What's another part of the way that these guys, or the writers, are kind of getting away with so much misogyny and sexism here? And it has to do with those two versions of masculinity. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee and let you think about that one. Yeah, so how are they kind of getting away with so much misogyny and sexism? And again, using those two versions of masculinity. I feel like Dunya had a thought over there. Yeah?
They're convincing the audience emotionally and mentally.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're lampshading, which is making the audience feel like they're saying they know about it and it's okay, so they're getting the permission to laugh at.
Yeah.
And then when they're laughing at it, and when the guy's feelings are hurt, and the guy stops being misogynist, maybe it makes the audience not laugh. Like, there's no more jokes are getting cracked.
Right.
They're not laughing. They're also following the emotional structure of the guys.
Okay, so it's true, right? And part of the writer's job is to kind of, emotionally manipulate the audience, but sort of get them to feel what they want them to feel, right? There's definitely that's part of it. But what do those two versions of masculinity have to do with it?
I'm so confused.
Okay. Let me help you out. So, what are some of the things that we see the Big Bang Theory guys doing? What do we see them doing that's kind of like sexist or just like not cool?
Stalking women.
Right,
Taking
so-
down their address and sending like a drone to spy on them. It's very creepy.
Yeah, so there was some creepy behavior by Howard, right? They were stalking America's top models and using drones and yeah, giving Penny's the blonde girl who lives across the way, giving Penny a teddy bear with a webcam in it, right? That's kind of creepy and not cool. What else?
They're making jokes about women's menstruation problem.
Yeah, so yeah, lots of jokes about menstruation, right? And about and kind of like making fun of it, but also like it's kind of like a belittling, making fun of, right? But based on women's menstruating, we hear a lot of that. What else?
Looking at other women even if you're like engaged. That's pretty
Yeah, yeah. Howard was kind of very clearly checking out other women while he's engaged, right? So that's not cool. What else do we see these guys do? What about Raj?
Raj doesn't take no for an answer, even after being a nice guy.
No, well that's Leonard, but yeah, let's stick. So Leonard doesn't take no for an answer, right? So Penny is not interested in him, but Leonard doesn't hear that, right? He just keeps on trying, and of course the show rewards him, right? At the end, the show says, "Oh, Penny finally." You know, they get, I don't know if they get married or not, but they wind up together somehow, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Leonard doesn't take no for an answer, and his character is actually rewarded, right? He actually succeeds and gets Penny.
Yeah.
But what about Raj?
Raj is like quiet person, but when he gets on drugs or drinks, he starts talking to women in such a way that it's such a sexist way.
Yeah, right? So Raj can't seem to talk to women at all, and then once he has a drink, suddenly he can talk, but the stuff that comes out is very sexist and offensive, right? And we see him he's naked in a Starbucks, right?
He
Like
pulled his pants down.
he did, right? He pulled his pants down in a Starbucks, right? That's not
Not cool.
that's not cool at all. Now, one of the things that works for this show, and this is what they're pointing out, is that these guys are all kind of written to be harmless, right? They are nice guys, even though they're engaged in a lot of sexual or sexist, bad behavior. They are nice guys, right? So the audience knows that, these are okay guys. Like Howard is a creepy pervert, but he doesn't mean any harm, and he wouldn't intentionally hurt anyone, right? He's not that type of character. He is a nice guy, at heart, and they all are. But of course, in real life, we don't know that. But we'll get to that in a second. But here, they're contrasting it against the sort of hyper masculine, aggressive alpha guy that we also know about, right? So think about the alpha male archetype or the alpha male kind of guy. Now imagine him doing and saying all of the things that the Big Bang Theory guys said and did. Is it the same? No. What's it like?
But it's different. You wouldn't expect.
No, you don't expect them to do it. So when the macho, alpha male guy does all that stuff, it's not funny, is it? No, right? Because we actually know that he could do something, right? Like he's capable of causing harm, right? He can, when he says he's gonna, spy on the top model house, when it's coming from like a alpha male, it's kind of like, dude, like, ew, right? It doesn't come off the same way, right? But with these guys, because the show kind of frames them as these harmless guys, you kind of chuckle, right? Because you feel like they're not really capable of doing anything wrong, right? When they're all having Chinese food and they're like, oh, let's go to the clubs and meet hot women, right? They're not going to do that, right? They don't have the self-confidence to go to a nightclub and chat up women, right? They're not going to do that, right? And so it's funny, right? It's funny because they're just not masculine enough to do what they say they're going to do. And that's kind of the humor, right? So the show kind of makes them into these kind of pathetic, geeky, non-confident guys, and it allows them to get away with, saying these things that are, that they just can't do, right? And so they have more experience? Oh. Yeah. Exactly, right? They don't have a lot of experience with women. They don't really know how to talk to them. And so the show kind of creates a situation where we can laugh at these guys doing sort of sexist, misogynist things because the show kind of frames them as harmless, right? They're like, oh, they don't know what they're doing. They're not going to do that, right? They're not going to go to the club. They're not going to cause any harm because they're framed as harmless, right? But again, in real life, is it like that?
Scary movies also like that.
Okay, let's hold on to Scary Movie for a second. Pause. But yeah. Say that one more time. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the show kind of frames them as that for sure. But in real life, guys behaving like this, it's not the same, right? Because here on the show, we're the audience and we know things, right? We know that these guys are harmless. We know that they're pure, right? They're harmless. They're not going to hurt anyone, right? We know these guys are awkward and weird and do stupid things, but they're not dangerous, right? But in real life, of course, we don't know that. And specifically in real life, women don't know that, right? Women don't know. What's that?
It's like they don't bring a threat.
Well, that's the thing is that,
At all.
yeah, like on a show like this, you know that no harm is going to come to anyone, right? It's a funny show. It's 20 minutes long. It's just in good fun, right? But in real life, you don't know that, right? You don't know that the guy who's stalking you is not dangerous, right? You don't know that the guy who will not take no for an answer, you don't know that he's not dangerous either, right? And so in real life, the behavior that is kind of funny and on Big Bang Theory, in real life, it's actually kind of scary, right? It's scary and upsetting, and it's harmful to women, right? Stalking is, funny on TV when Howard does it, but it's not funny in real life, right? It makes women feel unsafe, right? But unfortunately, the show here does a bit of a disservice because it frames these behaviors as harmless, right? And again, it's able to do that because it frames the characters as harmless, right? On TV, we know that these guys are not going to hurt anyone. They're good guys. Everything's okay, right? But again, in real life, it doesn't work that way, right? We don't know that guys who behave in this way, we don't know that they're not going to be dangerous, right? And even if they're not going to be dangerous, their behavior is upsetting, right, to women. And so the show kind of trades in a lot of sort of stereotypes and misogyny, and it gets away with it because the characters are likable, right? They're all funny. They're all, they're all nice guys, really, at heart. And again, we know that. But in real life, we don't know that, right? The guy at Google who wrote that big long email talking about how, we shouldn't try to encourage women into science and technology because of their biology, right? They're just not cut out for science and math, right? Their biological urges hold them back, or whatever he said, right? Which is ridiculous. But again, if that was written by Sheldon on the show, it would be funny, right? But here out in the real world, those same ideas are not funny, right? They're ugly and harmful, right? And so it's interesting to kind of pay attention to the framing of situations and characters, right? How characters are kind of written and how other characters respond to them, right? Now, look at Leonard, for instance. Leonard likes Penny, right, the blonde girl. Penny thinks he's a nerd and she doesn't like him at all, but he doesn't take no for an answer. He keeps pursuing her, right? Probably for 5 or 6 seasons until she finally gives in. She's like, yeah, he wore me down. Now, does that sound like it would work in real life? Imagine somebody asking you out. Now, imagine that you don't want to go out with this person at all. So they ask you out and you say, no, thank you. Whatever you say, right?
Not looking for what?
You're not looking for anything right now. Whatever you say to kind of let them down gently. But they keep asking. Keep asking. Every week, every month, for 5 years, right? Does that make you like them more?
No.
Does that make you eventually say yes? No, right? Eventually you call the police and say, like, this
You'll
person...
get annoyed and angry.
Yeah, it'll make you annoyed and angry, and you're like, this person won't leave me alone, go away, right? What's that?
Mental harassment.
Yeah, it's harassment at some point, right? And here on the show, again, it's framed as, Leonard's rewarded for that, right? He's persistent, he keeps pursuing Penny, and Penny finally says yes. And we know that Leonard's a nice guy, right? We're rooting for Leonard, we're cheering for him. But again, it doesn't work like that in real life, right? It's okay to ask someone out once, maybe twice if you feel like you caught them on a bad day. But, you have to stop, right? And you can't, if you keep pursuing, you're just harassing this person. And they're not going to say yes, they're going to say no in an increasingly brutal way, right? And so again, the show kind of frames things in a way that either doesn't work in real life or, in real life it's not the same, right? The behavior of the characters on the show, if you transplant it into the real world, it's not funny, right? It's scary and offensive and sometimes dangerous, right? But it is interesting, right? Now that, and you can look at other shows this way too. Pay attention to those kind of sexist or misogynist things. And again, you may not notice them because the show is very good at, smoothing it over, right? By lamp shading or by writing the characters as really sympathetic or having other characters respond, right? They say something racist, towards Raj, and does Raj say, you know what? You guys have a big problem with race. I'm out of here. And he leaves. That never happens, right? He just kind of laughs or he shrugs and then they go back to whatever they're doing, right? And so again, the characters respond in such a way, and when Raj kind of shrugs his shoulders, or he's like, oh, that's clever, the audience is given permission to laugh too, right? And so, but pay attention to it. Pay attention when there's something sexist or kind of racist that comes up. Watch how the show frames the characters and how the other characters respond, right? Yeah, it gives you permission to laugh at those things. Although Scary Movie, and I haven't seen it, I'll admit, but Scary Movie's kind of it's a satire, right? So sometimes satires are specifically pointing the finger at something like racism or sexism, and they make a joke out of it to point it out, right? So the satire is a little different. Yeah.
Have you seen where the boyfriend hates his girlfriend or something?
He hates his girlfriend?
Hates.
Oh, he hates. Okay.
So, or something like, I don't know, I forgot the reason, but he hates her. Yeah,
Hmm.
that was like, I was shocked. But then again, a lot of people were laughing at it.
Yeah, it's interesting, and sometimes it's tricky to analyze those things that are sort of comedic or that are satire, right? Because humor is a very kind of delicate, nuanced thing, right? And you can say something, you can say something racist or sexist and have it come off as funny. You can use satire, right, to actually point out a problem of sexism or racism. Satire is a little different. But then you can also handle it badly, where you try to make a joke about it and you really just come off as offensive, right? And so it's a very difficult kind of balance to use the humor the right way. And so satire is something that actually tries to point out the problem, right? Here, they're trying to just smooth over it, right? They're trying to make these jokes, and then they're like, oh, it's okay, we know it's a little offensive, ha ha ha, and then they move on. They sugarcoat it, exactly. So, well, let's see. Okay, we're doing good here. We're doing good. Let me just see where we are. Because we started. Right. We don't have time to get into that. So maybe what I'll do is I'll end with this idea here. So, because we'll talk a little bit about tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit about predatory romances in movies. Predatory romances. So again, men acting badly towards women. Okay, but we'll get to that tomorrow. But I thought I'll just mention this: is that whether we're watching a romantic comedy or whether we're watching a show like The Big Bang Theory, I've been accused of ruining things for people before, right? Because I point out, oh, there's a lot of sexism here, or oh, there's a lot of racism here. And then people go back and look at, some of their favorite television shows or movies, and they see it and they're like, oh, now I see this thing that I didn't see before. Thanks, Mike. And so I have ruined a few things before, but I thought I'd mention, it is okay to like these things, right? Like, it's okay to, even if you feel that, romantic comedies have some sexist messaging in them, it's still okay to like the movie, right? But it is important to sort of pay attention to what kind of social messages occur in media, right? Especially in television and movies, because I think now, like, we watch more television or movies than probably we ever have in the history of civilization, right? Most of us have at least one streaming service, probably.
Netflix.
Maybe two, maybe three. You could watch movies all day and all night, right? For the low price of $11.99 a month or whatever it is.
$11.99.
Yeah.
It's more proports to the
Oh, good. But you could watch movies all day long, right? I couldn't do that when I was a kid because you'd have to like own all of the movies. Yeah, the VCR and the whole thing, right? Ridiculous. What? DVDs, yeah. We had a VCR when I was younger, but
I don't know what that is.
yeah, no, it's.
I think my mom knows.
Yeah, your mom probably
It's
knows.
like an electronic device where
I
they
don't
movie
know.
or cassettes.
Yeah, it's like a little cassette with the movie on it. It's about that.
Oh,
It's a
I
tape.
know that one. I had that one when I was like.
Yeah, the tapes are about that big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like cassette.
Yeah.
And then you push and it, the TV plays it.
Yep.
Yeah.
You remember. Ancient technology, Stone Age technology. But again, like, we could watch movies all day long, right? television series, they stream them now. You can binge watch an entire season in like a day if you try to,
Yeah.
right? And so it is worth paying attention to the messages in these media because we consume so much of it, right? And they are important.
There is a new series on Netflix that got like recently popular. That's called Squid Game. So I've like binge watched it and finished it in a day.
Yep.
Night, so.
Right. And so yeah, so you can, binge watch Squid Game, right? But the question is like what messages are being transmitted? What are you absorbing, right? And I'm not saying nobody should watch The Big Bang Theory because it's sexist, but it is worth paying attention, right? And if you can see these messages, then it's easier for you not to absorb them, right? If you kind of think critically about what the show is telling you, it's easier not to absorb negative things, right? And so, I watched The Big Bang Theory. I've laughed at it before. And then, I watched this video essay and I started looking at it and I was like, oh yeah, there's a ton of sexism and misogyny here that I didn't really, I think I was sort of aware of it, but I didn't really think about it, right? And after I thought about it, I was like, interesting, right? And as you kind of start to do this with this show and with other shows, you start to notice it a lot more in other shows as well, right? You can sort of critique and pick these things out, right? And again, you can still enjoy them, right? Like I still like movies that are sexist and that have racial undertones and there are white savior narratives, and I know all this, right? But you can still like them, but it's if you can critique them and understand what those messages are, it's easier not to absorb them, kind of thing. Yeah. What? Yeah. Yeah. So exactly. So you can watch The Big Bang Theory and laugh, but their behavior should not be imitated, right? You shouldn't do what those guys do. They're not good role models. Okay. Shall we leave it there for today?
Oh, I have to remind you.
Oh yeah, okay. All right, so I'm gonna end it here for today. I'll hand those back. I'll end it here for today because we started late and we're all a little bit off. I have something else to show you for tomorrow, but we don't have enough time to do it today. So I'll let you go. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll talk about this sort of predatory romance thing. Yeah, and then we'll go from there. So online people, I'll see you tomorrow. Have a nice afternoon, okay?